As your presenter, I have over 3 decades of personal and professional experience, including academic training in the field of disabilities. I also advocate internationally as well as locally. So this is why I'm one of the ADA coordinator. So we will briefly, so what is the spirit of ADA? ADA is a Civil Rights Act for the future. It's the first comprehensive declaration of equality for people with disabilities. In the beginning, it was just a civil right, but which did not include disability. So with all the discrimination and segregation that people with disabilities were victims of, the Congress adopted in 1990 and in 2008, the American with Disabilities Act. So it was adopted to prohibit discrimination in federal programs, services, to ensure that people with disability have equal opportunity for their employment, education, public accommodations, transportation, commercial facilities. So actually, they made it easier for individuals seeking protection under the ADA to establish that they have a disability within the meaning of the ADA. One thing that I wanted to say before we move on, we are doing this program especially for World Bank family members who are coming to the US for the first time, because not in all countries we have laws regarding people with disabilities. But when you move to the US, it's important to understand that the US has a special provision for the inclusion of people with disabilities. So not only for those who have disabilities, but it's important to know how do you treat someone who has a disability within your own household and then also outside. So we want to measure, the family members when you move to the US to understand that people with disabilities have a special space for them to speak out. So the ADA protects people with disabilities living in the US, regardless of their origin.
I'm changing.
Yeah. So it's important also to know that not everyone with a medical condition is protected by the ADA, simply because the ADA has its own definition of the disability. So it's to be protected in a working environment. A person must be qualified for a job and have a disability as defined by the law. So either the person has a physical or mental condition that substantially limits a major life activities such as walking, hearing, eating, learning, breathing, and then also when a person has a history of having a disability, such as someone who has cancer, which is also in remission, or when the person believes that he has a disability, a mental or physical impairment, he is considered disabled under the ADA. So again, I wanted to stress that the ADA is not a medical term, it's legal. When you hear ADA, we are talking about justice. And the definition of disability under the ADA is different, for example, from Social Security disability related to benefit in the US. We also have other definitions. WHO has its own definition. The UN has its own definition, which is the UN Convention. You heard maybe the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, which is the global law regarding people with disabilities. but we will focus on ADA today. So only those under ADA who has a physical impairment as social disorder or some of the cosmetic features that impact the way their body functions. So you have a list. So if you think that you are related to one of these conditions, you will be covered under the ADA. People who also have emotional and mental illness, mental retardation, organic brain syndrome, and learning disabilities can also be covered under the ADA. You have also the long list that is important also to know them. We wanted to also to talk about children with disabilities, since we are talking about the family members, and then also later on we'll connect with a practical example of what we are talking about here. Children with disabilities and students with disabilities are also protected under what is called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It covers children and youth from age 3 to 21. The main objective is to provide them with a free and appropriate public school education. Only public education. So it's a national special law for special education, meaning to be under the special program for education, the student has to be mentally, physically, socially, or emotionally delayed. Delayed meaning that they have, in terms of education, they are behind their peers. So therefore, they require a special program to help them meet the traditional classroom environment. So for children with disabilities, if a parent suspects that his child has a kind of delay, the first thing to do is to ask the school to assess his ability, and this is free to families. But the diagnostic doesn't mean that the child will be qualified under the ADA. We'll see later on the qualification. So the idea is to provide a free, appropriate public education to children with disabilities, but mainly to give parents the choice in their child's education. Actually, this is why we are doing this program today, for families who are new to the US, to understand that you are not alone, and we don't expect you to do it alone if you have a child with a disability. I say that because I have examples of people, because they don't know what the law is actually providing to them, they don't express their concerns, and sometimes it's part of the cultural belief. So it's important for families to know that they have a voice in the US when it comes to the education of their children. So to qualify under the idea, the child must have a disability under the ADA, and that disability needs a special education. So if a child is eligible, the school will work with the children, with the family, to develop what we call the individualized education program. So that again will give a say in the education and then the rights of that child with disabilities. So to qualify under the idea for a child, it must fall under 13 disability categories that the idea covers. So you have all this. So far, there are 13. So again, not all what we believe are disabilities are covered by the ADA. So now coming back to the ADA, who must comply? We are talking about entities with 15 or more employees, or public agencies, also privately operated commercial entities, meaning a restaurant, hotel, museum, because they are also public area where people go and then spend some time. So therefore, it's important for those commercial entities to comply with the ADA. The ADA actually excludes private clubs and religious organizations, but because a lot of people go to church or to the mosque, some private clubs and religious organizations decided to also comply with the ADA. And again, listen, this is just the overview of ADA. So later on, we will go into details, but today we are simply giving you just an overview. So the ADA has 5 titles. The employment, meaning that we don't need any discrimination in all employment processes. The Title 2 discusses accessibility in public entities. Title 3, accessibility in businesses. Title 4, telecommunications, which is accessibility of telephone and communication system to the public. And then the last one is the protection from retaliation. So all these are very, very important, but it will be discussed in the next seminar. So why is the ADA important to us? Before the ADA, people with disabilities were really discriminated. There was nothing for them to be protected. Even as of today, you will say that people with disabilities are still discriminated, but because of a law, people are paying attention to their rights. So it's possible for everyone now under the ADA to have a decent freedom and equality. So the ADA, yes, protects the right of people with disabilities living in the US, regardless of their origin, their race, their sexual orientation, their age, and then also in education and employment, assessing public services such as transportation and public and private establishments. So because of ADA today, for example, you have the push for the door, and then even someone who has who have no disability or no impairment can also benefit this kind of services. Today, according to the statistics, there are 54 million Americans who have a disability. So the ADA has helped impact their lives, their families as well. So why did the Congress make the decision to adopt the ADA? I was talking about the discrimination that people with disabilities were facing. It was really, really important. They couldn't go to school. Of course, if you don't go to school, you won't be able to be qualified for a job. You cannot move. Their mobility was limited. they couldn't ride on a bus. So there were a lot of issues that people with disabilities were going through. And then their number was increasing. So therefore, something needs to be done. So of course, with the civil rights movement, people with disabilities advocated for themselves to have the law adopted so that they won't be able to be victims of what society thinks. So before they were isolated, segregated, and then even their family members were also discriminated because they were associated with disabilities. Another example was even as of today, the housing. People with disabilities do not have a decent housing simply because we are not building housing with disabilities in mind. I will just give you an example. Last year, there was a bill passed to make sure that people with disabilities in the DC area have access to accessible housing. So the ADA is mainly about equal opportunity. People with disabilities and people without disabilities should have the same opportunity. So the ADA is a powerful legal instrument that has helped to change how society views and accommodates its citizens with disabilities. It's to create a more inclusive environment where companies, institutions, organizations reach out to people with disabilities. And I think that summarizes the overview of the ADA for today. And we hope that you will also give us your feedback, and then other topics that you want specifically to hear so that we can organize it for the next seminars. Otherwise, as you can see, this is just a rough overview of what it is, but we are planning on having a detailed program next time. So again, thank you, and I'm ready for your questions, comments, and yes.
Yes. One very quick. So if you're on a G4 visa, you're covered by the ADA.
Exactly.
Second question is, how long is the process by which you find out that your disability is covered? Because you said that it's not automatic that your diagnosis is covered, even if the sort of general category is covered. So what's that process about, the application, to find out if you're covered?
Okay, let me start with the G4. Let's say your child has a disability when you move to the US. The first thing to do is to, I live in Maryland. I'm just giving you a concrete example. There is a Board of Education. So once you register, if you want, and this is the public, not the private, if your child has a disability before you move to the US, a private school is not your best choice. So if your child has a disability before moving to the US, once you move, you have to make sure that you register your child through the Board of Education. So they have a full comprehensive assessment. So at that level, they will know already if the child has a disability, and the process will start right there. Okay, the second aspect, you are still on G4, and then you don't know anything about your child having a disability. It's in a public school or private school. So it's also your responsibility. If you believe that it's not behaving the way it should be, you can ask the school to do an evaluation. So the school, they always has a psychologist. So the psychologist knows the list of the items covered by the ADA, plus the idea, the individual Disability Education Act. So they will tell you if that is covered under that act. So I don't know if that makes sense. Because, and then after that, you may want to move from that private school to the public school. Unfortunately, the private schools are not equipped to address the issue of a child with a disability.
So thank you. So basically, this is a process where you work through the institution.
Yes,
okay.
The public institutions. If you want to still stay with the private institution, it will be a lot of challenges for the parents, because of the public institutions, they have already the full range of services for a child with a disability.
Can I add to that answer just a few thoughts? I mean, in our experience, it's also useful to supplement the diagnostic work with the potentially private providers. So there are, practices, private practices that are specializing on children with intellectual emotional disabilities, and can sometimes be placed in terms of advising you, even in terms of school choice or school district choice. Sometimes there's, for example, neuropsychological practice that I'm right now working with in the context of the placement of my son. We're returning from a field assignment right now, by the way, into Maryland. And there's a neuropsychologist who's providing a comprehensive assessment of my child, and there's also a school consultant whose job is to then help us figure out, the nitty-gritties of the school system, who to talk to in the board, when is a good time to start the discussions around the individual education plan, what are some of the challenges to emphasize in the discussion around the individual education plan. So just to mention that there is a psychologist that is provided by the county, I think, for the most part. And what we learned in Alexandria, where we used to live before my field assignment, is that their incentive is sometimes different. Their incentive is sometimes aligned with the county or the city or the school system, and they don't necessarily want to provide the kind of assessment or the kind of label that would be best fitting your child's needs. So you need to be prepared with your own arguments that is typically best underlined through, private practitioners.
You get an idea of the challenges.
Exactly, yeah.
One thing I want to mention is that, so this is, we are starting something that is new at the bank, meaning that, this group wants to be a resource group as well, so that, families can get together and then share the experience. I also have a child with cerebral palsy. So I also understand what you are talking about, but the public institutions are really there to help.
Okay.
So
just again adding on what you said, I totally agree with you. And regarding the question about the time, for us to get an IEP, it took around 4 months to the whole process. It's not something quickly. It helps a lot having private documents and assessments, because they really take that into consideration, and they're kind of afraid that you say one doctor is saying that and another doctor is saying that, but it takes time. For us it took at least 4 months to actually get an IEP, a meeting for the IEP. That doesn't mean going to defining what the IEP is going to be, but it's a long process.
The process can be long when you don't know. So again, this group is going to be important, so that when a family, when families are joining the bank, if they believe that they have a child with a special, child with some kind of need, it's important to reach out to this group.
Immediately in touch with other families.
Yes, because the lack of information can
Give me
also
your cards, please, gentlemen.
delay the process of it. Because if they know that you have the information, The reason why I'm saying that shortly, I wanted to share also my experience with my own daughter. It took 4 months. But what I did, I hired a lawyer because I said it's impossible for a public school to take all this time. But as soon as they saw the lawyer, it took only 30 minutes.
Yeah, and that's why.
So this group is really, really important. And I'm just telling you guys, let's work together to take advantage of what is going on today so that, as soon as you are moving to the DC, you reach out to this group and then the group will be able to, because when you have a knowledge, it goes faster.
And I invite all of you, please, to share with me and to share with us the resources you have, names or consultant on, because we build a database of information, so we will compile and add your resources. So it's very important. We build this based on collection of information from our members, from also some professionals, but please share with us what you have.
If I may add something, I'm Catherine, the coordinator of the Family Network. I know we have some members in country office following by WebEx, and of course this ADA apply only if you are in the US, but keep in mind that this is just the launch of our new program, and we really want to understand how we could better support family when they relocate overseas, and connecting the families, tips, sharing experience, etc. This is what we want to do worldwide, not only in DC. Of course, in DC we are probably much better equipped than in some other countries, but it's still a reality, and we still need your experience on that. So share, please.
And then also the ADA, I'm representing the ADA, but I'm a tiny aspect of the resources available to family members. So as we go, we will even bring the expert, depending on your need. We'll bring the expert in specific field so that they can spend time explaining or giving you all answers that you may have. So again, feel free to also, we have the evaluation form and also a signing sheet so that we know how to follow up. But this is really, but then what Catherine just said, yes, we are talking about the ADA. The reason why we don't want to talk about others is simply because in each country they do have specific law. But the basic thing is that we want people with disabilities to have access to equal opportunities. So therefore, whatever we are doing here, it can have some implications in other countries. So sharing the knowledge is very important. And then also we are setting up a peer group format. So for example, if we have a question regarding education, people who have information on education can get together and then share the experience. I have myself 2 children with disabilities, and I'm willing to spend time with you and then tell you what I've done and what really worked and what to avoid.
Thank you, Jeanette. You wanted to add?
I just wanted to add one more thought, because again, bringing back the issue of the ADA. So the ADA would in theory also apply to American schools overseas. I think it would be a really good resource, as Catherine mentioned, to also brief parents with children with disabilities who are embarking on a field assignment, which is not impossible, but extremely challenging from the perspective of school placement. Some of those schools take the ADAs very liberally, and they'll have families will have we had a very hard time in Bucharest finding a school, and it wasn't the American school that eventually accommodated my child. He's a moderately functioning on the autism spectrum, by the way, reasonably well performing. But it was extremely difficult to find services for him there, and it wasn't the American school who gave us the services in the end. And in that environment, there is no way to go either with lawyers or any sort of other private resources. You're basically on your own. So I think this is a very good resource to mention. The other is that since we just returned, I'm just done with kind of like the shopping for school district exercise, and I kind of wanted to underline what you mentioned, that indeed there's a vast amount of public resources, and then some counties or some locations are much better equipped and much better focused in spending those well. Montgomery County, for example, which of course is, really one of the best equipped and best performing counties in terms of social services in general, is really appears to be a really good bet. And everywhere else, it's, in our experience, a bit of a jackpot. It's really difficult to figure out which school, which district, would be working well with a particular condition. So basically, the feedback that we heard from many professionals that we had consulted with, and we went through a long list, was like, in a systematic level, Montgomery County is really the best choice for pretty much anything related to school placement for children with disabilities.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, any other questions? So?
And I'm willing to share my Montgomery County experience, which I don't think is the best.
Okay.
I don't know the others. But it's not. I mean, it's not like the panacea for the child. So, I mean, I've been through that process in Montgomery County, and it's still get it and hurdle.
So let's.
So I have the same experience, meaning that we really need to
combine your experience. Yeah. Thank you, Jeanette. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I invite our second presentation, please, Gillian.
It's Friday night, and it's late. It's August, and one whole school year has passed by, and a new one is about to begin. My phone rings. Dr. Ray, this is Miss Lemon. My son, Miles, he's 4 years old, and he's in preschool. I don't know what to do. I don't think this school is the right place for him. A speech therapist told me to call you. Tell me what you think. Why do you think this is not the right place for my son? The teacher says he can't sit still. He's disruptive. He's talking all the time, moving around all the time. He's hyper. I don't think he's learning anything. I've talked with the teacher. I've talked with the principal, the social worker. I just don't feel like anybody gets Miles. They don't understand him. He's smart. He's loving. He loves his friends. He loves to go to school, and he wants to learn. I am exasperated. I'm worried. I think something is wrong with Miles. What do I do? So what I'd like you to do is take about 3 or 4 minutes and think about this story. And I want you to write down on a sticky note, what did you get from the story? What came up for you? And can you relate to any piece of it personally? Sorry, thank you.
Let me help you, Lily.
Have a pen or you have a pen?
Don't be shy. Don't be lazy. to our members or colleagues online, if you want to send through the chat, we have only one person monitoring WebEx, so confidentiality is total. Okay? We received stuff. Nothing yet?
No.
All right, so it looks like most of you have written some notes down. So the next step is I would like you to pair with somebody. It doesn't have to be your direct neighbor. Maybe you feel like getting up and walking around the room. Find somebody, and I want you to share what came up for you. So I want you to exchange your thinking, okay? And talk about what you reflected on. Or maybe share your personal story.
Okay.
And then what you can do is take another Post-it note and write your combined thoughts. Okay?
Yes.
So, can we see how many people we have online or not?
I see four. So what I wrote. Stumbled on a rope. And that's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know, because when I came, it was very hard to find.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I think that's
Right.
And now,
I mean, of course, I understand that. Right. So during a process where we're
Yeah.
because there is no, I don't know why
Because I was already very
Ça va, t'es plus détendu là? J'avais dit que c'est pas ça qu'on a commencé. C'est pareil qu'on a commencé. C'est dur de résister.
And I had them winning for a while.
Avec un accent.
Of course, I mean, we had the same experience. Actually, somewhat similar. So we have two boys, and both of them were born here. Aaron is 11. He was diagnosed with autism, I think, when he was 4. And then he went to the equivalent of early stage in Alexandria, which is a child find organization there. Then he went to public school in the city of Alexandria. And it was working reasonably well until grade 3 when the curriculum skyrocketed. He was receiving lots of throughout the day, and special ed teacher, 1 week on 2 management reasonably well. My wife would take him to EST, all that stuff. We have to, as you also said. And then we moved to Bucharest. Basically, the reason was that we had to put him from the city school in Alexandria because it just wasn't working anymore. So my wife was homeschooling him, which was going well.
No, I think that.
But then we would have had to move somewhere because then we're no longer in the city. So we might as well move to Montgomery County or Fairfax or somewhere, and let's just do it field assignment and see how it works. And it worked up until a mental condition came in. Basically, in January, he had a psychosis, and he started so he had started hurting himself. So basically, he pulled out a tooth. Actually, and turns out he has hernial situation. And so we had to be thrown back to the States like 5 months ago.
Sur Webex,
We were driving home to Bucharest from Hungary and halfway through the trip we started and so we had a medical evacuation, we came back and I immediately transferred back to my job at transferred back to DC. And so here we are now. He's now in his medical evacuation, he's receiving therapy, but he's not in school right now. He will be in September. Right now he needs all kinds of other therapeutic interventions for him to be in the school environment. And so the interesting thing is that the original condition wasn't, I'm sure you were to mention it, right? There's all kinds of therapeutic interventions.
Well,
He's pretty well. He was pretty well functioning. Well, not light, but it was certainly not Asperger's, but it was light in the way. Verbal in
the exercise.
Many academic fields he was performing. So there was no issue.
All right. So it seems like everybody has had some time to talk about. Is it there?
Yes.
Feedback.
It's the journey.
Okay, so we're going to go to the next part of the activity. I have been told that people on the WebEx did not hear the instructions, so I apologize for that. So what everybody was doing is just talking with a partner about what came up for them after hearing the story about Miles and his mom. And then everybody was sharing any piece of it that they could relate to it personally. So if you want to take a minute to think about that. I know you may not have somebody next to you that you can share with. So the next part we're going to do is invite people to share as a pair what came up for them. So.
We can start if you agree.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Should I like to start?
So, I will
try to speak louder.
Okay, so the first thing I'll be doing is cry and be desperate and trying to find help where I don't know, but definitely I will be overwhelmed by the situation. So it's not probably the perfect answer you are expecting.
We are not asking. It's perfect in its perfectness.
So, yes. From my experience, because this is what happened to me when I found out my younger son had a disability, I was completely devastated. I didn't know what to do. Arriving in the US, who to talk to, and it's a very emotional and very hard experience.
Yeah, we have two of these episodes. One when my son was originally diagnosed with autism 7 years ago here in the States, and then the second one when we learned that he has early onset schizophrenia in Bucharest, on the field in a country which is fabulously ill-equipped for any sort of mental health intervention, and then he had to be evacuated back to the States along with us, and then here we are 5 months later. The feelings are pretty much the same as the ones that you shared, and then on top of that, quite a bit of anger, because there's of course the coping mechanisms that we all learn, and there's of course the self-management techniques. But in the end, there's something that happened that was outside of the parents' control that is hurting our child, and we cannot do anything with it beyond providing whatever we can.
So frustration, anger,
Exactly.
crying,
Sadness.
feeling like you don't have any kind of control or influence over your child's life. Next.
No, you go ahead. No, you go ahead.
The first thing that we thought is that there is a little bit of disagreement or resistance to accept the diagnosis. We know this cannot happen. Mm-hmm. My child is normal. He doesn't have any problems. So some resistance. And then we were discussing after that what are the resources that I have, and normally we don't have resources at hand. We're in a different country, so we don't know the language or the things. And we were just discussing different type of resources that we would have, or we would like to have.
Yeah, so we were talking about the list of resources we could look at, for instance, so the psychologist, maybe, the schooling, the type of schooling, or then the financial, where to look for the financial, because often a child or a person has to go to a special school. So where do we get the resources for that? That's a total maze, right? Then a peer group. Find a peer group. Find a group of who is parents who are in the same situation. Now these are all kind of solutions, or not solutions, but things on the way, right? And then you were mentioning the workplace support, which is also, of course, very important, because as a parent, you're very lonely, and you feel that you're the only one, right?
Exactly.
And then, in your case, you were already abroad, so you might have needed a translator. Of course, important too. That's
Good point.
where do you find that? So. And you were suggesting this, right? The list of resources. Mm-hmm. And you had yourself...
From the lecture, I said, I am thinking about that. When the parents go to the school with that problem, probably the school, anyone give great answers. And this is very complicated, because the process would be very painful to find solution. You know, I am really don't think so that the principal, the teacher, the psychology is prepared to give me individual solution. They will give me institutional solution, and that's a really painful moment because I need to satisfy my needs about my children, and this process has to be really faster than it is today in the school. So it's important to have a specialized team in the schools. I know in the United States could be done, but maybe in other countries could be. I don't know. It could be. So this process has to be important between my individual needs and the solution that the school is going to have to me, because it's a process very, very complicated. Very complicated.
Well, you did a really nice talking about all these different aspects that are so critical, and I think in the U.S. many schools, public and private, they have teams, social workers, psychologists, and so on, to support children, whether they're diagnosed or not diagnosed, to support learning. But several of the things you hit on were that we often don't see the child. We don't see the person because we cannot get past the wheelchair. And we cannot get past that he or she is nonverbal. And we see these things first. And when we see these things first and we don't see the person, then we start to test children. We start to assess them in all kinds of ways because we feel like as a team, unless we get a diagnosis or an IQ, how else do we engage this person? And so in doing that, we lose sight of the human. That this is a person like anybody else. And that all of us, and when I use the word disability, I sometimes, cringe only because every one of us struggles with something. And so in many ways, we all have a disability. We all have some kind of disabling condition or aspect to us. It's being human. And only because we see somebody in a wheelchair or we see somebody flapping their hands or making funny noises or not able to speak to us, then we feel like something is wrong with them. And we have to get a label, or we have to do an IQ test so we can figure out where to put them, how to categorize them, and so on, and what class to put them in, and what subjects they should be learning. Instead of really getting beyond that and just saying, this is another person. It's another human being who has aspirations like we do, and is no different than any one of us. And I think if we can get beyond that, we can remove many barriers. Our attitudes, number one, the environment, the context in which we all exist, to rather support people to be successful in life than hinder them. So those were really good points in terms of barriers, right? But they can be supports as well. Who would like to go next?
Yeah, I'm just hearing a story about his kid or something. So it's for me, like, everybody's probably, if somebody will hear, I can, try to compare it, or probably it's too much, but something like he went through 5 stages of grief. Yeah, so of course, first stage, you're on denial, because of course, why me, why not other people, it's too much for me. And then also you're new to, this area, so you don't know anything. So of course, the next one will be obviously like anger and, depression. Of course, obviously, it's, especially parents. And of course, probably after that one, you tend to go up high, and then of course you reach the acceptance stage, which is of course you find resources, you try to talk to people, and you try probably online, or those people who have the same disability. Now, like you said, for this case, it's physical, and of course us, we don't know, or we may know, but we think that this is not disability. So of course we may have mental, emotional, or probably like, everybody knows physical. So probably I can only contribute on, stopping the stigma of just, this is just, and we just, kind of support each other, and not only trying to condemn that person, and, find resources if you have something, or if you know somebody, right? Yeah, so.
Yeah, and one of the points that you brought up is that is a big source of frustration for parents is compliance.
Right.
So you know your child, and you know what your child's strengths are. You focus naturally on the strengths because what your child is good at, and you know that. But when they go to school, the schools tend to focus on the problems, right? They focus on what they're not good at. So it's a little bit of a different optic. And that is a big source of frustration because you're getting the letters and the phone calls that, maybe he threw a chair, or maybe he fell asleep, or maybe he flipped the table, or whatever it is, you're getting these phone calls. Or he didn't want to enter, or she didn't want to come into the classroom. And you're thinking, who is this child? And how can I make him or her comply? So then as a parent, you end up putting a lot of energy into how can I make my child fit in? Because they have to comply with the school rules. Just if they can only just sit still and pay attention, and for one, school day, no phone calls, that would be a great day, right? That would be a great day. And you're sitting at your office hoping the phone never rings. Right? And that's that's frustrating, that's exhausting, right? And meanwhile, you're going, but he's an angel. She's an angel. I know my kid. So that compliance piece does bring about a lot of frustration, right? And a lot of exhaustion on the part of the family. Thank you. Next.
Could you raise your voice?
Okay. From the first step, when you started to talk, it hit me when I realized it can happen to anyone, and it can catch you in the moment that you're not really prepared for it. Right. And it's a changing situation. And the first moment, there's a lot of you don't really understand what's going on, and for the frustration, and then as a parent, you know that you're going to fight for everything that you need in order to bring your child the childhood that they deserve. And you know that deep inside that your child is perfect and is beautiful and is smart. And you might have also a second thought that maybe the doctors not really know what they're talking about, or be more confident to go with your parents' instinct. Yeah. And we also discussed about the support that you need to receive from anyone around you, like teachers, parents.
Mm-hmm. Well, the point that you raised there was about instinct, and I think we all have instinct. Children, right? We all have these feelings that this is not right, or we may not have the answer, or know maybe what is the best or better option, but we have this instinct that sometimes we don't always, maybe we second guess, but it's still there telling you that something is not right. This is not the best place or the best thing that's happening for my child. Just like Mrs. Lemon, she didn't know what to do, but she knew that this is not right. This is just not the right context and the environment for my child, because I know he's amazing, and I need a different place where we can see how amazing he is, and he can be amazing. And so that led to the phone call, but that intuition is it's usually correct. Right? Thank you. Anybody else?
Like something hearing to his story, even I realized he's telling it was very difficult to take up this thing that my child got into this. Initially I thought, it's like he's lazy in doing it. Right. It's not the fact. But once you accept, it is really difficult to accept this first, that this has happened with my child. And once you accept, you have to be very patient, and you have to consistently. You just cannot show your frustration and all that to your. You should not pass child. It should go to them. Like they will feel because you are the one who are taking care of them, and you are the role model for them, like you're the parents. Saying it is easy to say something, but those who are going through it, I really understand what they're going through. But you have to be very patient, and you have to make sure that they should get to school, and you have to support them morally, and you have to raise them with full confidence and the self-respect them, and everybody should help them. This is the good that we are doing. And we should support them.
Yeah, and
whatever best we can.
That's another important point that you highlighted is the relationship. The relationship that you have with your child, the relationship you have with the school, and the relationship that parents have with each other. So, husband and wife, mother, father, that's one relationship that is also affected by this whole dynamic, and that affects the child. And then the relationship that you have with your child, the relationship that you have with yourself, right? So in many situations, we have to unpack our own bags, so to speak, because that baggage affects our children. And many times you cannot manage other people. You can influence them or try, and you cannot tell the principal or tell. And so that could be where you're spending a lot of energy. But what you were saying is you could use that energy to really work and build a relationship between you and your child. Because not only are you impacted as an individual parent or family, your child is impacted because they start to live into the area that something is wrong with me. And we're talking about children as little as, 2, 3, and 4, because the consistent message they get is, I'm not good enough, something is wrong with me, I can never seem to comply, be like the other children, I'm always being called on. In fact, their peers affects the relationship with their peers in the classroom, because then their peers start to go home and say, Johnny was doing that again today. Or in class, they start to not play with the child. And now, not only do you have struggles with academically, now there are social struggles, right? Social challenges, because nobody wants to play with the child outside. Nobody wants to share things. And this is a social, emotional impact. So we all know that if we don't feel good, how do we get things done? And so you're talking about this very young child now who starts to feel like something's wrong with me, I'm not good enough.
And there is no fault of those, but the kids, they don't have any fault in it. It's not their fault in it. So unnecessarily they are suffering because but there is no fault of them.
And so
it is like this.
Exactly. And so my point is, as a parent, a caregiver, this is a relationship you can manage, right? This is one that you can manage and try to foster an alliance with your child and try to build a more positive relationship. And because you believe in your child and you know they're amazing, you see them in terms of strengths, not problems. And you love your children no matter what. So this is what your child needs to hear and see and feel and know. That they are amazing, that they are good enough, because it's really detrimental when children this young start to feel like they're not good enough and there's something wrong with them, because it will impact them for the rest of their lives. It will impact them when they're adults, how they relate to other adults, their relationships as they get older, and so on. So it is very far-reaching effects, and so on that point, it's worth every minute of your time to invest in that relationship, right? And of course, in doing so, you have to understand your own self. So you have to also get in touch with your relationship with who you are to be better for your child. Anybody else today?
My partner left, so I'll just speak for myself. But my daughter is 29 now, and she's relatively okay, but she was born with birth defects, and it was very rocky for 12 to 15 years, and I don't remember a lot of the details. I don't think about them, but when you told that story about Miles, I immediately went back 25 years to the phone calls I was getting and this sense of something out of control. I could never get it back on track. Mm-hmm. And it was very emotional, and that's a long time ago. It scared me, even though I left those years behind.
Yeah. It's a scar.
It's a wound.
Mm-hmm. A wound, I should say. Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else that I left?
Maybe on the WebEx?
Yeah, I was going to go to the people on the WebEx. Anybody on WebEx would like to share?
Not that kind
Not
of.
that. Thanks, Kat.
Share or mute?
Share, yeah, share or mute. Hello? Anybody there?
We have 5 people there, so.
Have we lost them?
No, we're here.
If I may add something to all of you, what caught my attention is the loneliness, isolation, which is very, very scary. No?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the story. No one understands.
Exactly. And so as a parent, you're lonely. You need an advocate for yourself, to advocate for your child. And if I'm the only body who gets my child, it is a very lonely road. And how do you find somebody who gets this, who understands, an advocate for our family?
And even being the other parents, many times, both parents do not share the same.
Exactly, and it's exactly why I was highlighting the relationship is many between parents, between yourself, between the child, because all of these interactions, the relationships affect the child ultimately and how well they're going to do. So yes, many parents don't agree with each other, and there's a lot of tension between parents about what is better, what is not, or what's going on with the child. So add that layer into the whole dynamic. And if mom and dad are not getting along, it's really difficult.
And instinctively, the kid will think it's his or her fault, exactly. Of course. So you put even more on it.
Exactly. And, I will say that just because I think it's important when you're talking about relationship between the mother and the father and the caregivers, that amongst our families with disabilities, the divorce rate is higher than typical families. And so it's already high in the U.S., but amongst couples who have a child with a disability, I think it's about, if I remember, it's about 85%. And so, exactly.
I guess it's similar with the family with the death of a child.
Yes, because there's a lot of, you go through, the couple goes through the mourning process, and they might not both be in the same stage of mourning. And mourning also with the child with a disability, because you have to both get to this acceptance, and then what you're going to do about it. And one might be further along than the other. And they might still be stuck in this blame guilt phase.
Even if it's not the blame guilt, it's the, I need all my energy to just survive and to go through this process. I cannot give you, the other parent, anything.
Well, and
I'm sorry, I just cannot.
Yes, and so in that, what you're saying is you also, as an individual, you need to be cared for. You need self-care, but you also need to be cared for. You need love. Right? And so now you have two exhausted people. Where is that coming from? So you have to be a conscious effort to protect the relationship.
Can I have 2 more thoughts? Just because both of them had been raised earlier. one by, I believe, you on the importance of the workplace and the environment. And there I've had, just from personal experience, both good and bad. The good was with my immediate superiors and the GP that I work for, which is the SPJ GP. I cannot speak for other employers, but the SPJ GP is fabulous in terms of, in particular, in my situation, they were fantastic in handling our, prompt relocation and accommodating in my work program, making sure that, everything is fine. So at least for my own team, I can say that they were massively behind this whole discussion around home-work balance. And so that was fantastic. Beyond them, when we went through this recent crisis of my child going into basically psychosis in Romania, I noticed a great deal of adverse reaction from peers, from my immediate colleagues. Right. Essentially, I mean, we got disinvited from dinner parties,
so
right?
You were ousted
it was which yes. Of course, I mean, you understand people are scared, they don't understand the condition, which I think brings up the importance of advocacy, not just in terms of legal advocacy, but knowledge sharing and the broader dissemination of what it's like to live in a family where the child has a disability, what it is like what are some of the things that mean a lot to us, what are some of the things that mean a lot to our own children. So I think it's important to share this knowledge also, in line with many of the good suggestions that
that's
you also
another
have.
important note is that families are socially isolated. So as an individual, it's lonely, it's isolated, but as a family, you are isolated because nobody wants to come over or nobody wants to play, nobody wants to invite you to parties.
Which for the record is the least of your concern at the time, but I mean, at the same time, it's still like, whatever, I mean, who cares at that particular moment, but in the end, it does affect my child, right? Because it does feed, it deprives him of a potential network to expand his or her own, possibilities.
Exactly.
So I think it's important.
The whole family is treated with this perception, right? So that's a very important point. So just to close the activity, I was going to ask if anybody's wanted to maybe just share what they felt like was common, what came up that was kind of common to all of us. What did you find that just, a theme that developed that kept coming up? What do you guys think that might be?
I think the frustration at all the levels, accepting what your child has, frustration with the process, frustration with what path or what to do with your child. I think for me that's kind of, I realize it's the frustration of what to do and how to do it and how to manage a relationship, and I think that's a common thing.
Anybody else?
Probably awareness.
Awareness?
Yep.
Resilience. I think in our case we had to constantly remind the teachers how our kid was functioning, and
speak loud, Natalie. Louder, please.
We had to constantly remind the teachers how our kids was functioning and what worked and what did not work. And I was surprised at my kid has ADHD and how little the teachers understood, and so year after year we had to go and meet them several times per year and sit with them, and you cannot let it go. You have to continue to fight to make sure that he gets the
So you
the
advocate
best
for your
opportunities.
child. Yeah. So it's exhausting. Anybody else?
Dilemma in mind. Dilemma. Like whether I should go for this, what decision I'm taking for my child, is it correct or not? So uncertainty.
So dilemma, which is the best decision? Anybody else?
Future. Future.
Future.
Yeah.
The future. Anything missing?
Can you just ask them to mute?
To mute. So
We did ask 10 times. We are sharing these V screens. There's nothing we can do. It's very annoying. Please mute.
Can you say it in French?
We did it.
Regardez-moi ça.
Did I leave? Did we? Everybody happy with that? Yes. Okay. So one thing I wanted to add and to share with you. So to also give you a little bit about the research, so that we also know that we're not just making this stuff up. So we're not just feeling these things and going through this every day, and it's your reality. But there's much research that has been done in this area of, what is the best approach? What is the best type of intervention? How do we help children to succeed? And, what should we focus on, or what's the barrier? And so I did look at one study. There's several, but one that I found was, I think, it's really meaningful and hopefully will resonate with us today. But one of the studies they found that, the most common barriers to children being successful, and that's children with a disability, is adults.
Is what?
Adults.
Oh, adults.
And I'm going to go through the several adults. I'll say adults, and then I'll just go through really quickly some of the areas that they found specifically. And one of the first one was attitude, right? And so if we are to view our children positively from a strength-based view rather than a deficit model, we need to change our attitude. Right? We need to reframe our thinking about disability. We need to shift this paradigm. So we need to change our attitude when it comes to improving children's success in life. Because then we will see them, not the wheelchair, not the inability to speak, or the hand flapping and so on. Okay? The other was the physical environment. Right? It's a barrier. But the environment in general, and the environment is many things. Context. It's a context in which we perform our activities. That is a barrier. And these are children. So who advocates for children? They're at the mercy of whom? Right? And then the other one was lack of support. Lack of support from adults, from caregivers, from social workers, from staff at schools. So what the study was saying, it's not, the big take home was that impairments in skill is not the barrier to a child's success in life. Because we'd like to blame a child, because we'd like to focus on their problems, to say that this is the barrier, this is why they cannot succeed, or this is the problem. But in fact, it's not about the impairment in skill that's a barrier. It's about all those other things I listed. It's about us as adults, it's about our attitudes, how we view children, right? Imagine if I only saw Kat's glasses, but I didn't see Kat. And I made a goal that said, I'm going to improve your eyesight. I'd be working on that till the rest of my life, because your eyesight most likely is only going to get worse, not better, right? And you'd be walking into the world. But if I offered you some glasses, but I focused on you as a person, what are you good at, right? That improves your participation in life, in activities of daily living, and it also improves your confidence and self-esteem, rather than me just focusing on the deficit. Because none of us progress in life by a deficit model. Because if we all focus on deficits, we would be struggling. Right? So this is exactly what the research supports, that focusing on impairment in skill, not other way to improve a child's success and anybody's success for that matter, right? We have to see strengths, not problems, or at least we don't have to focus on them. And so if we focus our interventions on only remediating this, we're not also going to have children who learn how to generalize skills, right? That's important, not just teaching a child how to do something, but how are they going to use it in everyday living? How do they generalize this? How do they translate this, right? It has to be meaningful and purposeful, but in order to do that, you have to see the whole child and not just the deficit. So one of our primary roles as occupational therapists, because I'm an occupational therapist, is to not to focus on problems, not to focus on remediation of deficit, but to really equip people with the skills for the job of living, to enable children to be successful, and to remove those barriers. And as I said earlier, we all struggle. Right? We all love it when we see the little, sidewalk where you can roll your suitcase down and you don't have to pick it up. It's helping all of us. So this is what we're talking about. We just all have various different difficulties, but if we view the person instead of the problem, we look at people in a whole different way. Right? Try it with your colleagues this afternoon. If you only view what they suck at, what's difficult for them, it's a really different relationship if you rather view them and what they're good at, right? All right. So one of the other things that I wanted to also share with you that I have a private practice here in DC as well. It's called Sublime Living, and I also teach in the Department of Occupational Therapy at NYU. We didn't have time to talk about that earlier. And I left some cards as well, so I don't forget. That's what I'm telling you. If you want to reach out to me or contact me. So with that said, is there any other questions or comments that we'd like to add? Okay. So what I'd also like to do is I have some reading materials or just some resources that I'd like to share with everybody. So I will ask for your email so that I can give you access to those materials, not to bother you, but I'd like to, there's some good literature out there on a problem-based approach and relationships and how to build those with your children and with each other. And I'd like to share those with you. So if you don't mind sharing your email, I can do that.
What we can do is to share, if you agree, what we can do, because people register, so I can share with you the name.
To make sure that all of us,
yeah.
Mauricio, did you?
No, I will see.
So we will, yeah.
Okay, so, good. So,
neither.
There's just one more thing I wanted to add. In closing, what are some of the things that you guys are going to take away from this? I want to hear from you. And what connections did you make, and what are you going to leave with today?
I think the initiative of doing this in the World Bank, this is the first for us. For us was such a struggle to arrive here and not know anything. And we know we're not the only ones, yes. but at least there's, I think it's a great initiative and organizing these and bringing you and the other person just to start the ball rolling, because it's such a pain for new people, for non-Americans, yes. And understand the system. And I think for me it's like the beginning of something yes. greater, I think.
Yes. Well, I'm glad you mentioned non-Americans. I have 4 children, and I'm from South Africa. I'm now an American and a South African citizen. I had to keep both. But I understand that coming from your home country to another country that's foreign with children, trying to navigate all of these things. So it's difficult.
And if I may add, something that we because we are working on that, the team led by Lubna, for more than a year. And what we have seen is a lot of a little taboo, a bit shy. The environment at the World Bank is very competitive. We all know that. Sometimes you don't really want to share that you have some struggle at home. We saw the same thing when we put together a group of single parents, especially moms. They don't want to share with their management sometimes that they are single mom.
Right.
Because that could mean that they will not be,
well, they'll be treated differently. So because
this is our reality.
That's the reality. It's the same with somebody with a disability applying for a job. Many people with disabilities don't show on the form that they have a disability. They just don't check the box until, obviously if you come to the interview, that might be different. But they're afraid that if I put it in the application, I will be automatically treated differently, right? I will be put in a box.
Yeah, and that was the idea of doing peer groups. Even if we are not planning to ask for an hour of your time every week, but at least if we have a family and talking with them, we will remember our welcoming team is here also. Right. We will remember some commonalities. And you can be sure that I will go after you guys. Can you please give a hand to this family who is just arriving? This is how we function.
Exactly.
So that's the idea of do not say alone, do not reinvent the wheel. Do not. We have been there where you are, so share.
Thanks, Kat. So, and anybody else want to share what they're going to leave with today?
To be positive.
To be positive.
Yes, to be positive.
It can be a conscious effort sometimes. That's the reality.
Especially the parents.
Exactly.
This peer group idea is very good because they can share. You can share and again you can go back to your home with full of your energy and the positivity. So that makes a lot of sense for your child. That is what you will pass to.
Exactly. You can contaminate them positively. Yes.
Just wanted to add maybe two more points. One is in terms of resources in the bank. There is, as you know, a counseling unit in the bank, and I just wanted to mention that they're fabulous. I don't know about exactly when, in what situations people normally go there. I went there myself because of the medical evacuation, and they're a fantastic help. So they're a great resource. And they're there. They respond very quickly. They are super helpful, and they will have resources. They have a certain amount of time that they can spend with staff, and then beyond that, they will refer staff to private practice. But up until that point, it's a fantastic resource. That's one thing. The other is that I think there's a Yammer group with I just come across it, and I maybe think
what? Sorry,
a Yammer group, like a social media group.
However, the Yammer is available for the staff, not the family, not the spouses, the family.
It just makes sense to somehow cross-fertilize the two.
So the lady who was here, she was their representative also. So we will work more and more together in terms of combining the help we can provide to the families and also they will support the staff. So
that's really cool.
And about the stress counseling, very quickly, if I can add, stress counseling unit, they are really good. They are exclusively for staff. So what we put in place, I can be very proud of that because it was before me. So I'm not that arrogant. But WBFN Advocacy Role also got an envelope every year from the bank to sponsor the same kind of service, referral service mainly, for staff that the stress counseling unit does for families. So spread the word. We have this envelope, we have our own clinicians, it's a referral service, up to 3 or 4 consultations, worldwide, country office also, all the languages for spouse or family members above 18. So spread the word with all your colleagues if you... For staff, stress counseling unit. For family members, it's called FCS, Family Consultation Services. It is on our website and we have brochures. So keep that in mind.
Thanks, Kat. Any questions for me?
I'm doing my commercial.
It's okay. Anybody have questions? We have a little bit of time, so questions. I don't promise answers, but we can talk about it.
Did you sign up the attendance? Yeah. Okay. Great.
No questions. Well, they might arise later. And but I invite you to email me, call if there is something that rises later or something that you want to know more about, or if I can connect you to somebody and so on. Of course, Kat has all of my information as well, so you can reach out to her if you need to and contact me. And I've left my cards there on the table over there as well.
But please tell us, how is Miles and his mom doing?
Well, they're actually doing really well. And so one of the things that I do is, instead of having families come to my clinic, my practice is about meeting families where they are. And this is just my philosophy and my fundamental belief in how I think families should be best served. Families already ask a lot of them. We've spoken about all this exasperation and exhaustion, and I feel we're asking them now to also come twice or three, whatever it is, to a clinic. There might be 5 other children at home. There might be several other kids with disabilities. So all this to tell you why I believe that this is the best way to serve families. But it's also backed by research that when we work in natural environments, we yield more satisfying and more long-term effects. It's a far more sustainable model, and I know at the World Bank you guys know about this word sustainability. So it takes much longer to reach the goal that you want to reach when you work in a clinic. Now, I'm not saying the clinic is bad. I'm just letting you know and explain to you why I work the way that I do, and I see the change overnight. One visit in the home of Miles, and we see changes because it's Miles' toys, it's his backyard, it's his playground, it's his neighborhood, it's his kitchen. So these are familiar, it's his context. We spoke about environment. This is his personal environment. I go to children's schools. If the mom says, Mrs. Lemon, who was exacerbated because she didn't know how to appeal to the teachers. And I said, let me be your advocate. Take a break. Go get your nails done. You need to take care of yourself too. This is exhausting. You need to not feel alone, because that's how she was feeling. And I went to the school, and not to judge the teachers, not to tell them you suck, or you need to get Miles, no, but to observe, to be part of the classroom, but to coach them, to meet them where they were at. Because I didn't go in there making an assumption that they didn't know any better. I just felt like I need to meet them where they are, and let's move together as a team on how to best support Miles, but not only Miles, because one of the comments the teacher said, she said, you are the first person. We get a lot of providers that come here, speech therapists, PTs, to serve kids. You are the only one that didn't just only talk about Miles, but you talked about the class as a whole and equipped us with skills to manage everybody. And one of the things I said was, well, you're not running a nightclub and you're not bouncers where all you're doing is like throwing out the people who are making problems and being disruptive, because that's how you're spending your energy, rather than teaching and having a good time at school, because school should be fun too. So I said, what I'm coaching you to do is manage your class effectively, no matter who comes in. Right? No matter which kid is in your room, that you have a well-running classroom. And so that's how we spent our 1 hour. And then another. And I said, it's not a one-off thing. I'm holding you accountable to these things we've discussed, and I'm going to come back and work with you again to see how things are going. And of course, I'm always available by phone. So yes, I do get parents calling me on a Friday night at 7 o'clock. Because that's how I choose to work. So I didn't make that up. It's real, but it's very satisfying. Because if you have little kids, you know, even the example of temperature, or your child is throwing up, and all you want to do is talk to the pediatrician, or just tell me that he or she's going to be okay, and all you get is press 1, press 2, okay, music, waiting, and then finally you might get to, you know, speak to somebody.
Even worse, if it's an emergency.
Yeah, dial 911. Exactly, and good luck in the ER. So I felt like these barriers, environmental barriers, need to be removed if possible. And so that's why I choose to go to families, whether it's at school or in their home or on the playground, or simply if I can attend your IEP meeting to be your voice and your advocate when you cannot. And that's what I do. So it's a lot of consulting and coaching, but it works. Because at the end of the day, as parents, you need to be empowered and you need to feel like you can manage your household effectively, right? And have a happy household. And that's what it's about.
Thank you. So before you go, I have a very short evaluation from the first presentation from Jeanette. If you don't mind, it takes a few minutes.